Honorable members, the issues raised here, one of the observations made by the table is that, as the reference made by Honorable Swart, that all bills that have been introduced in the Assembly and which are on the last sitting day of an annual session of the Assembly appear on the order paper for the first or second reading, lapse at the end of that day unless the Assembly decides otherwise. Now, work had already been done at that stage, including second reading debate, and therefore, you don't have to go back to that. So this is the observation that is made about that matter. And so you can't go back to a matter that was already decided, meaning that as it came here before the House, that's the observation that is made. Yes. Yes. So, yeah, no, honorable members, the point that I've just raised now is that having made that assessment that the second reading had already been gone through, what we need to do is to indicate whether you want that amended, because that's what would matter before us now. Can't go back to that, yeah. Honorable Singh and Honorable Mild at the back there.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker.
Yes.
I think we must not put the cart before the horse. And the Honorable Chief Whip of the Opposition has made a valid point in that the House has first got to bring the bill to the House. Then the decision of the question we can take at a later stage. We can decide tomorrow when that item should be put on for a decision. But what we should be bringing back to the House now is a lapsed bill, because the bill has lapsed in terms of the rules to be revived.
Yes.
And I would suggest that in terms of what Honorable Swart says, I mean, I don't want to respond to him, but it's common practice that in a new year, we revive the bills that lapsed in the preceding year. We do not do it at the end of 2018, for example. So I think we are right in reviving bills now in 2019, except for item 1, which is trying to revive a decision on a question.
Yes.
But we should revive the bill, and then we can take a decision in the next few days.
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair.
So, yes, let's hear Honorable Member first, and then we'll come to you, yeah. So that, yeah.
Honorable Deputy Speaker.
Yes.
The Honorable Chief Whip from the ANC refers to this general sentiment. But the problem is the rules doesn't make provision for sentiment. It makes provision for provisions.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I'm afraid that the Honorable Chief Whip of the Democratic Alliance is absolutely correct. The rules, Rule 333, does not make provision for the revision or the bringing back of a decision that was not taken for whatever reason. We can revive the bill. We first need to revive the bill. We cannot revive the question that didn't take place on that day. Regardless of the sentiment, that's what the rules say. So if the Honourable Chief Whip wants to proceed with the resolution, I would suggest that he amends his resolution and removes point 1.1 for today. He can bring it tomorrow. But if we pass it as it is now, it will be unprocedural in terms of Rule 333.
Yes, that's correct. Honourable Chief Whip.
Deputy Speaker, we would like to make an amendment to point 1.1, which we'll submit to yourself now. And 1.1 will then read, second reading, Road Accident Benefit Scheme. Thank you, House Chair.
Honourable members, there is an amendment moved by the Chief Whip. Is that in order? Are you fine with that amendment? There's agreement. Thank you. Let's proceed. And therefore agreed to. There's no objection. Okay. The Secretary will read the first order.
Consideration of Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Amendment Bill, and of report of Portfolio Committee on Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs thereon.
Honorable Mdaga. Honorable Oh,
I'm here.
yes, go ahead. Why are you speaking from there in the first place?
No, I can speak anywhere.
No. Just do what is normally done. Please, you can't change the rules in the middle of the game. At the end of the game. Please come. That you chair the subcommittee of the rules does not entitle you to do that. Just go ahead, Honourable Member.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. In November 2018, the National Assembly passed the Traditional and Cohesion Leadership Bill and was forwarded to the NCOP for concurrence and was adopted on the 10th of January 2019 with the exception of the abstention of the DA. Makes provision for the recognition of concern to effect consequential amendment to the other laws. Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Amendment Bill was presented to the representatives of provinces during a meeting of the Traditional Affairs, Technical and Governance Forum. The bill was further presented at the Lehotla, held by the National House of Traditional Leaders and representatives from the provincial houses of traditional leaders on the 23rd August 2016. The Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Amendment Bill 2017 seeks to provide for the establishment of Kingship and Queenship Council in respect of the Kingship and Queenship that has been confirmed by the Commission of Traditional Leadership, Dispute and Claims in accordance with the Act prior to its amendment in 2009. One of the main purposes of the transitional provision is to deal with immediate such as the agreement and has to be proven history of existence of the community from a particular point in time up to the present, recognition of co-assigned community and a branch before the new law came into operation and to provide legal space. Honorable Deputy Speaker, the Portfolio Committee debated this matter when we presented our bill 2018, and we agreed as a National Assembly to pass the bill and was taken to the processes of Parliament. The NCOP made consequential and some minor technical amendment. As a result of that, the committee, COCTA, having considered a proposed amendment by the National Council of Provinces to the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Amendment Bill of 2015, adopted the Portfolio Committee report on the 13th of February 2019, with the exception of the DA that rejected the report. The committee recommends that the National Assembly approve the report with amendment. That's an issue, Honorable Speaker, Deputy Speaker, that we are presenting for your consideration and approval. Thank you very much.
Honourable members, as there is no list of speakers, I recognize the Chief Whip of the Majority Party. Chief Whip.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. We move that the report be adopted by this House.
Are there any objections?
Deputy Speaker?
Yes,
the DA would like to make a declaration, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Is that the same? Okay.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. I would like to make a declaration as well.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Ned.
Deputy Speaker, I don't know whether Honourable Ndakane has spent too much time in the Magistrates Court recently, because we're debating the Traditional Leadership Governance Framework Amendment Bill, not the TKLB today. So, Deputy Speaker, when I walked in here today, I took a photo of a banner outside the Old Assembly, and it was a vision of the National House of Traditional Leaders, and it said their vision is to be a house of traditional leaders that strives for good cooperative governance in traditional communities. And I thought, isn't that ironic? Because this is exactly what this bill was intended right back in 2003 to introduce. And it didn't. It failed dismally. This amendment bill is trying to correct a wrong. It is trying to correct a problem that has arisen because of sheer incompetence and lack of political will on the part of the department and the minister. The Democratic Alliance acknowledges and recognizes the role and function of traditional leaders, and more importantly, traditional councils. And this legislation was intended to extend the time frame of the time frame that those traditional councils had to transform and to conform with the Principal Act, and to legitimize those who had not complied. Now, as I said, when we first debated the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Amendment Bill in 2018, and what I said back then still holds true today. One, the original act passed in 2003 gave traditional authorities 1 year to transform, hold elections, and comply with the new legislation. And one of those requirements was that 1/3 of the members of traditional councils be women. Two, when those traditional councils failed to do so within the 1 year time frame, we brought an amendment in 2009 that was passed, and that gave them 7 years dating back to 2004, in other words, up to 2011, to comply. Three, the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs at a national and provincial level has repeatedly failed to ensure compliance or to assist those traditional authorities to transform as required by this Act. Fourth, it perpetuates apartheid-era tribal authorities that were created by the 1951 Black Authorities Act and entrenches specific tribal identities by virtue of apartheid-era spatial boundaries. Despite the fact that Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke noted in the seminal judgment in Tongwane and others versus the Minister of Rural Development and others, and I quote, "To use the Black Authorities Act of 1951 as a platform for reform after 1994 is incredible," close quote. In fact, I would go so far as to say it is reprehensible. Five, this amendment bill again extends the time frame by a further 2 years. And lastly, six, it is little more than stopgap legislation intended to shore up a dysfunctional system until the Traditional and Khoisan Leadership Bill that Honourable Ndakane stood here and presented so confidently about is passed into law. Deputy Speaker, we are being overtaken by events because of an incompetent department and an incompetent ministry. They have given no indication of how they will ensure compliance within the extended time frame. Let's not forget that over the past 18 years, no traditional council elections have been held in Limpopo, and those that were held in the Eastern Cape, Northwest, and KwaZulu-Natal were deeply flawed and rendered up illegitimate traditional councils that did not comply. In terms of the Principal Act, traditional councils have a limited term of office. For most, this expired in August last year. That would mean that any actions taken or contracts entered into by those councils once their term had expired would be illegal. All of which begs the question, what has this department been doing for the past 5 years? Could they not see the problem that the term of the traditional councils was about to run out? Were they unaware of the non-compliance with the existing Act? Deputy Speaker, this bill perpetuates a structure that is inherently undemocratic, misogynist, and frankly outdated. It puts no controls in place, nor does it ensure the rights of ordinary citizens. And I use the word citizens advisedly because our people are citizens, they're not subjects. It does not ensure that their rights are protected. We have repeatedly seen how traditional leaders and traditional authorities, and again I use the word advisedly because in many instances they have not yet transformed into legislatively required traditional councils, have plundered the financial resources of the very community they are supposed to represent, develop, and protect. And thus far, they seem to get away with it with absolute impunity. This bill was an opportunity to clarify the role of traditional leaders and traditional councils. It was an opportunity to create a more modern, democratic structure that reflects the will of traditional communities. It's an opportunity that has been squandered, and the Democratic Alliance opposes it.
Honourable Member.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, despite the amendments proposed by the NCOP on this bill, our fundamental opposition to it still stands. This amendment bill is a classic example of a state painting over cracks, hoping the cracks will disappear. The Portfolio Committee and the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs will have us believe that the bill proposed is just a minor technical amendment relating to the timeframes for proper constitution of traditional councils. But what the bill reveals is essence in the fundamental failure of the very conception of the governance of the institutions of traditional leadership across the country. The Framework Act, this is being amended here, is based on the logic and the model of the Bantu Authorities Act of 1951, in that it provides for a continuation of tribal authorities as tribal councils. This continuation was done on condition that the so-called traditional councils should transform to reflect the realities of the democratic society. It is now common sense that all those transformative ideals envisaged by the Framework Act have failed to materialize, and this failure is due to the very nature of these traditional councils. No attempts have been made by the department to understand what are the underlying factors which have contributed to the failure of these councils to establish themselves based on the provisions of the Framework Act. No attempts have been made to fix those shortcomings because though the department knows for their own political agendas, the government is not eager to challenge the traditional leaders to conduct their business in a democratic and legal manner. There needs to be a major rethink and reimagination of the kind of governance we need for South African rural people. And this amendment falls far short. Therefore, as the EFF, we reject the amendment bill. Thank you.
Honourable Member, please go.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, amakhosi asendlunkulu akhona angamalunga lendlu. Honourable members, whilst supporting this amendment bill and the extensions that its various categories of extensions seeks to enact into law, the IFP remains of the position that traditional leadership at community level is the best suited to address the needs and challenges of their own communities and should be empowered in parallel with the local government to do so. Traditional leadership is an extremely important aspect and component of our multicultural traditional value system in this country, and traditional leadership must be afforded its rightful place in local community and provincial governments. When taking into account the objections of the bill, emphasis must be placed upon the fact that there is still no clarification upon the roles of traditional leaders as mandated for in the Constitution. Additionally, I reiterate what was said by Prince Buthelezi last week in the SONA, as I quote him. Section 81 of the Municipal Structures Act remains an insult to traditional leadership. It enables us to sit there and clap hands, but not to vote. There is a strong feeling amongst some of us that government may as well do the honest thing and abolish the institution, close quote. Prince Buthelezi further rightfully stated that our government has failed to do what even an oppressive colonial government did. Not a single traditional council or house of traditional leaders is allocated a budget. It's a serious challenge. Yet we must cooperate and fulfill our responsibilities in local government, close quote. The IFP will continue to champion the voice of traditional leadership until its rightful place under our Constitution has been established. I thank you.
Thank you. NFP.
Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. The National Freedom Party welcomes the report of the Portfolio Committee as it provides for the timeframes within which kingship or queenship councils and traditional councils must be established. And it also provides for extended timeframes within the community authorities have to be established. However, the National Freedom Party wants to raise the following issues. One, we do not believe that the Constitution of the country covers the powers, functions and duties and roles of traditional leaders in a correct way. This scope, therefore, is very narrow. Traditional leaders do not merely attend to cultural and customary matters. They are also responsible for the development of their tribes and communities. 3, it is therefore our submission as the National Freedom Party that Chapter 7, 9, and 12 of the Constitution has to be amended so as to widen correctly the scope of traditional leaders. For traditional leaders have to be given powers to participate both in local municipalities and district municipalities, and they must have the voting powers. This recognition may not be enough, as all legislation that have tried to address matters pertaining to traditional leaders have not adequately addressed this matter. When we deliberate on matters of this magnitude, the land issue comes to the fore. Traditional leaders have always been leading the land issue with regard to settlement of their tribes and food security. This bill, therefore, besides trying to give time frames to the offices of traditional authorities and councils, it also gives the form and shape of how traditional councils have to be constituted, as seen in Section 28(4) and Section 3(2) of the bill. It is therefore the considered opinion of the National Freedom Party that this piece of legislation may not be final, as some more consultation has to be made with traditional leaders. Before we consider issues of legal uncertainty with regard to the status of traditional authorities, it is important that we consider the powers, roles, and functions of traditional leaders. Whilst timeframes of establishing kingship and queenship and traditional authorities, the key issue is about powers, roles, and functions of traditional leaders. In the areas led by traditional leaders, you will find that there are no schools, hospitals, clinics, TVET colleges, universities, and SAPS offices, and the government must attend to these matters. However, welcomes the report, yet it is not a finished task. Thank you.
Thank you. Co?
Thank you. We have, as COPE, consistently warned against attempts by ANC to foster apartheid-style Bantustanization of our tribal communities, of white ending their constitutional democratic rights to carry favor, not carry, but carry favor with traditional leaders for narrow party political and corrupt ends. The purport of this bill is to give traditional councils a further 2-year opportunity to give effect to important transformation requirements that they have failed to meet over the past 13 years. This includes the requirement that traditional councils include 40% elected and 1/3 women membership. COPE finds it reprehensible that many councils have failed over the past 13 years to comply with the law, and that government has failed to ensure compliance. It points to, as the high-level panel report concludes, a lack of political will on the part of the governing party to ensure the transformation and democratization of our traditional councils, of a desire to foster Bantustan tactics first applied by the apartheid regime. There is also a more sinister intent behind the bill, and that is to protect and legitimize agreements such as mining and other commercial agreements that have been concluded or are about to be concluded by untransformed and unelected traditional councils. The mining agreements concluded in Limpopo, for example, Platinum Belt, where no official traditional council elections have ever taken place, and where a few connected elite have profited at the expense of entire communities, are an example of this nefarious intent. The high-level panel report states that current and proposed legislation on traditional leadership denies people living in areas under traditional leaders several constitutional rights, thereby distinguishing them from those living in the rest of the country who enjoy full benefits of post-apartheid citizenship. COPE denounces the ruling party and government and those traditional councils who have collectively failed over the past 13 years to effect reforms envisaged by the Traditional Leadership and Governance
Honourable
Framework
Member,
Act.
Your
Thank you
time has
very much.
expired. Thank you. Honourable Dube.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, post the establishment of democratic elected ANC-led government in 1994, the Reconstruction and Development Program and the final constitution in 1996 gave the expression to the philosophical vision of the African National Congress and its government to the transformation and the support of the institution of traditional leaders in accordance with the constitution principle and democracy and equality. Proposed amendment provide the solution and clarity regarding the status of traditional councils and rural democracy. It has a bigger impact on the people's life in rural areas than in generally perceived. It does not only relate to the leadership issue, but also the power relation and the impact in which the national laws and policies have in changing the balance of power within the rural. Women and men are equal. It further influences the way leadership connects with mineral rights and the land used. It demonstrates the African National Congress-led government to resolve, restore, and defend the land right of rural citizens in a communal land. It makes it possible for the marginalized rural citizen to claim and defend the land right and transition. The African National Congress approved the committee report with amendments. I thank you.
Honourable members, that concludes the declarations. Are there any objections to the bill being approved? Okay, EFF.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, please note the objections of the EFF.
I will.
Deputy Speaker, the DA calls for a division. Thank you.
Okay. Honourable members, a division having been called, we will now have the bells rung for 5 minutes. No, there's enough membership. No, what does it require? What number does it require?
201 must be present.
Oh, in the House. Okay.
In the majority.
Honorable members, please take your seats, settle down. We would like to remind you that you may only vote from your allocated seat. When requested to do so, members must simply indicate their vote by pressing the appropriate button below the yes, no, or abstain signs. If a member inadvertently presses the wrong button, the member may thereafter press the correct button. The last button pressed will be recorded as the member's vote when the voting session is closed by the chair. The question before the House is that the motion as moved by the Chief Whip of the majority party be agreed to. Are all members in their allocated seats? Voting will now commence. Those in favor of the motion should press the yes button. Those against should press the no button. Those wishing to abstain, press the abstain button. Have all members voted? Thank you. The voting session is now closed. Honorable members, there are no abstentions. There are 78 noes and 186 yeses. The bill will be sent to the President for assent. The Secretary will read the second order.
Consideration of legislative proposal to amend the National Minimum Wage Act 2018, submitted by Portfolio Committee on Labour.
Honorable members, I know we are approaching the end of the term, but do the necessary thing. Be on the seat here on time every time, no exception. Go ahead, Tate Mashile. Go ahead, honorable member.
We are just from the vote.
Go ahead, honorable member.
No, thank you, Deputy Speaker. I think I have been ordered to be in my allocated seat to vote just now, and it was not possible for me to move. But thanks in any way. Deputy Speaker, you will remember that last year we passed the National Minimum Wage Act. One of our most important bills that we have processed in 2018. But after we have done that, Deputy Speaker, then it came to our attention that there is a technical error that has happened that was a consequential one, that it slipped through our fingers. And we then, late last year, got in the process of actually addressing that specific matter, which led to the committee meeting of the 16th of January, and then to actually agree that we should correct that error, because it is very important that we protect our workers. And therefore, Deputy Speaker, I'm here to ask the National Assembly to actually grant us permission to proceed with this legislative proposal in order to actually correct this technical error. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now recognize the Chief Whip.
Deputy Speaker, we move that the House, in terms of Rule 2733, give permission that the legislative proposals be proceeded with. Thank you.
Honorable members.
Deputy Speaker.
Yes,
the
Honorable
DA
Member.
would like to make a declaration, please. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Let's proceed. Okay, EFF. Honorable Member, please go ahead.
The Democratic Alliance supports the amendment, but not the legislation. The amendments are due to gross negligence, which gross negligence was pointed out to the Portfolio Committee by the Democratic Alliance at the beginning
Honorable members,
of December 2018, before the President had signed off the legislation. This amendment would not have been necessary if it was corrected timelessly, and an enormous amount of expenditure would have been avoided. With the advent of the implementation of the national minimum wage in 19, the trade union movement, and in particular COSATU, started to scream, "Jobs, bloodbath." The trade unions were hell-bent on screaming that the national minimum wage will not lead to any retrenchments. Now they say, "Jobs, bloodbath." Furthermore, they hysterically argued that the 20 Rand per hour was far too low and had to be ratcheted up exponentially. Over and above this, a lot of noise emanated from the academics and the red hats who did not want to hear about the fact that it was almost impossible to create more jobs in many of the blue-collar sectors. Even our Treasury warned us 2 years ago that we will lose 750,000 jobs, but the warning was not heeded. And in fact, it appeared to be surreptitiously withdrawn after a lot of probable pressure being brought to bear upon them. We hear the very unions bleating about the problems. Obviously, no one is going to blame the national minimum wage, as there's always someone else to blame and someone else to talk about. A matter of fact, Mr. Chair, we have the largest percentage of unemployment in the world. Almost 10 million South Africans who want to work cannot find work. Businesses are still contemplating further retrenchments. New jobs are not being created in the blue-collar sectors. Businesses are being encouraged to mechanize and computerize. It is said that the business community is on an investment strike. It becomes far cheaper to import rather than manufacture. Even with our own raw materials, businesses cannot compete with dozens of jurisdictions worldwide. It is sheer folly and, quite frankly, reckless for the ruling party to have pushed for a national minimum wage in a shrinking economy and dying manufacturing. When other countries reach 10% unemployment, senior politicians resign. States of emergency are declared and the labor laws are deregulated so as to encourage more employment. We have a knack of doing exactly the opposite. It is almost like stating that if the price of petrol goes up, I'm going to burn my motor vehicle. We are experts in South Africa in making decisions that have negative consequences. Our ruling party likes to call it unintended consequences, even if they've been warned for years about the probable negative results. No one in government seems to understand that businesses have to make a profit in order to survive. Continual losses through unsustainable overheads mean the eventual demise of the employer. It appears that our Honourable Minister even needs a course in Economics 101. It is very well to say that people need to earn more if the business is making a loss. Every state-owned enterprise has not been able to internalize that fact, and they need the income to be able to expand to the expenditure. If an employee does not produce enough to justify his or her salary, and the price of labor outpaces the value of goods, then something is bound to go wrong. It would be simple if we could merely raise the price of goods in order to accommodate the rising labor costs. But then you need to ensure that the purchaser is not able to get the goods elsewhere at a much cheaper price. The world is becoming smaller, and it is quite fair and reasonable for the buying public to purchase merchandise at the lowest price. The social and economic engineering is certainly not going to improve the standard of living of low-skilled workers. It will do just the opposite. We must understand, Mr. Chair, that in South Africa today, the real minimum wage is R0 per hour. Low-skilled workers will probably be retrenched or be employed for lesser hours. This has already started happening in South Africa. COSATU has said it's a jobs bloodbath. This causes the national minimum wage to be R0 per hour. And I keep repeating that. The system of the minimum wage cannot in any way change the real value of labor. And unfortunately, what it's really doing, it is sending a message to the manufacturers that it would be cheaper for them to import. Already we have seen employers who are just ignoring the minimum wage. And some of the employees, fully cognizant of the fact that they could lose their jobs, are just keeping quiet. We have only 1,600 inspectors in the whole of South Africa, and the chances of an inspector calling on your business is
I'm
null.
afraid your
Thank
time
you.
has expired. EFF.
The only reason why the bill is before the House is because of the incompetence of the ANC and its ability for legislation. Re ba kgalemetše batho ba ko committing and the ruling party gore le dira lepotlapotla le kidimela gore this piece of act Ramaphosa tlo dira electioneering ka yona a uaetše kgetho ka yona instead of going in detail and consider.
Honorable member. Honorable member, just hold on, please. Just hold on. Honorable Chauke, please hold. Honorable member, refer to members of parliament, including the president, appropriately. You don't call them by name. They are honorable or Mr. Your choice. Honorable member, I've made a ruling. You respond to my ruling. You don't continue as if I didn't say anything.
I'm correcting it.
You must refer to the president appropriately. I'm not saying you must restate what you said.
I'm doing that.
Go ahead, Honorable.
What do you want? I'm doing that.
I'm listening to you, Honorable member.
Yeah, I'm saying.
Deputy Speaker?
I'm waiting for the mem to...
But how do you hear him?
Honorable
Because
member, Honorable member,
He's
sit
correcting
down.
what he has done.
Honorable member.
I don't harass our member.
Honorable member, you're out of order. And nobody gave you a right to speak in the first place. You're out of order, extremely so.
Deputy Speaker, I think you must...
Honorable member.
Must listen. In the Bajira Potla or President Ramaphosa, at the electioneering, this act, without going into details and consider the Jilojaba Beregi. Emba, Renanto Ermagajo, and ANC, Hale, Ijira, Jamashila Bule. From 1994, figure alone. SEFF. Resajiralo rere. 20 rand per hour. Kili papadi. Kili tokomani. Agona labalele ta pelanga 20 rand an hour. Aliyo. Instead of using the opportunity of amendment to increase the minimum wage and further consult relevant stakeholders like SAF2. ANC ajiraja ona fela and ega hlaola bo SAF2 di you know je kaka ke ka lebaka le ba wetse ka leopeng lehono. The first time re bile e tla mo National Assembly, re ba boleletse hore take it easy, step by step, make sure the workers are getting justice out of it. They did rush, thinking our workers are stupid. Our workers are not fool. Thank you very much. We reject it.
IFP. I'll tell you outside the House, Honorable Member.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Speaker. At the outset, and whilst the IFP supports the legislative proposal as it seeks to correct an error of a technical nature which arose from a consequential amendment not being affected, we remain opposed to the idea of a national minimum wage for the very fact that it will harm far more employees than it will help. Employers who cannot afford to meet the threshold payment will simply retrench the employee, and will spiraling unemployment already taking place in South Africa. This is not the right move at this time, as employers will simply substitute labor for capital or produce less. Both options will result in fewer employees being hired. Moreover, the national minimum wage does not even meet what is required in terms of the breadline requirements, so will not assist those it's meant to help. Such artificial market intervention can only fail in the long term, causing more harm than good. The IFP has always advocated a sectoral approach to minimum wage determination and will continue along such lines. I thank you.
Thank you. NFP. Honorable Member of the EFF and Honorable Matthias, please help the IFP member. He wants to understand.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. This bill is coming to the House as a result of an error. The question has to be asked, was it because we were in such a hurry that we could make an error in a bill of this importance? The National Freedom Party supported the minimum wage bill, but we placed on record that the bill, with its good intentions, may not be sufficient to deal with the whole host of challenges that beset our people in the workplace, in farms and in mines. We also pointed out that 120 rand per day is not enough, and 3,500 per month is also not enough. But at least there must be something that our people are getting. We want to make a call as we deliberate on this proposal that there's going to be a need to make an amendment, and we deliberate this matter even further. Security officers, domestic workers, farm workers, miners, and all other employees need adequate salaries for them to support their families. The conditions of service, their conditions of service must be improved. They must be protected from abuse. The National Freedom Party also welcomes the correction as tabled here today in the form of a proposal, but there's still a long way to go to solve the problems of our people. They need land for settlement and farming. They need hospitals, schools, and clinics that are of a high standard. Our people want to feel safe in the land of their birth. They need jobs, and they want to create their own businesses. As we therefore welcome the correction of a technical error in section 17.4 so that it correctly refers to section 4.8 as proposed to section 4, as opposed to section 4.6, the National Freedom Party want to put on record that 2019 should be a year of dealing with all the challenges that affect the workers of our country, especially those who are at the bottom of the ladder or neglected when it comes to getting decent salaries. Thank you. We welcome the correction. Thank you.
UDM.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Tata UDM, Tata. Masini xelele sizawuphatha sinicela nifane nangcola sizawunideputize. Le issue ye minimum wage. Ndibavile abantu ebebethethelela osomashishini beteketa Oosomashishini baseMzantsi Afrika bangabakhathalelanga abantu abahluphekileyo. Ungalala ungatyanga, uhluphekile ungenayo nepeni as long as besenza imali. Uba bebe-patriotic ngale ndlela bathetha ngayo ngengakha benza investment strike batyibilike emalini abayi-inherite bayithatha port from the apartheid government bangayi-investi kule nto. They don't care whether you create conditions that are conducive for the nonsense that they keep talking about, but they continue their so-called investment strike. In fact, the same business people esithetha ngabo, the same ones who are net investors into BRIC countries bangafaki imali eMzantsi Afrika. Simane sithetha yonto sibathethele. I-minimum wage is a step in the right direction. Qha le mali incinci. Nani ngoningena kule nto ukuthi hayi masindinikeni ibhityi lalatyi njengokuba ukwazi ulala utyile ungakwazi ukondla abantwana indlala. Ibifanele uba le mali iqala ingaphezulu. Niphinde nenze le nto yenu. Ndiyekile mna le technical amendment irayithi ningayincokola sayincokola nganye imini thina. Urhulumente we-ANC uyathanda ubhideka mos uba unelaa xesha loba ufumanisa unenkungu. Uqala decide unyusa iVAT, uqala sethe i-minimum wage at 3.5 asagqiba nyusa iVAT, asagqiba ngathi ensure that the minimum wage amount esetiweyo iyayithatha that into consideration. Because neniphinde nibe le mali abantu abahluphekileyo nithi nantsi 3.5, how a lot of that money must still go to le nto yokuba as items iVAT increase yasiwa to 15%, ayaconsiderishwa that issue holistically because kaloku ifanele ukuthi ibe VAT sensitive. We should have, by the time siyipasa le nantsikele bill last year, ibe kanti that matter had been taken into account. The issue is, asizukwazi ukuthethelela oosomashishini baseMzantsi Afrika abanyolukileyo abahleli nje bazama ukwenza imali because the issue is about fighting for the share of the workers kwi-markup ye-business. So these are the people who generate the income, but they are paid a pittance because also oosomashishini balapha bafuna uba nemali eninzi and worsen the levels of inequality in the country. And we're expected to sit here as leaders, abantu abamnyama eziyazi intlupheko, and not make the necessary interventions in the economy that can provide the necessary protection that our people need in the labor market. Siyayisupporta le nto sithi yinyuseni qha le technical amendments nee-corrections ihamba ne-confusion ye-ANC. Yile nto sizayiphatha le country si-UDM phatha mandla.
ANC.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Of course, the DA re-emphasized today, honorable members, members of communities out there, that they are indeed strongly against the national minimum wage and is satisfied with workers earning low and slave wages. Honorable Bagram is indeed misleading the House and our people out there to say that there are enormous amount of money involved in this technical amendment. Indeed, it is only the cost of the advertising that is involved, nothing else. Please note that this is a technical error which arises at the final stage and not incompetence, Honorable Mateka. You were part of the process, so man up and also take the blame. There was no rush involved. The matter was discussed for more than 3 years at Netlek before being sent to Parliament. I don't see the rush, honorable members. En as ons haastig gewees het om dit te implementeer, so wat? Want ons het die nodigheid gesien om ons mense in die kwesbare sektore se lewens te verander met haas. One of the key agreements reached with business at Netlek was that no worker should have their wages or benefits suppressed or reduced by employers in anticipation of the national minimum wage. This was to protect the more than 6 million vulnerable workers from abusive employers. The date set for this protection was the 1st of May 2017. Protection for workers was incorrectly cross-referenced in the final bill as amended by Parliament. It means that workers now no longer have the key protection backdated to the 1st of May 2017. That's why it's important for the ANC to push this amendment through as soon as possible. Ons weet dat in realiteit is daar werkgewers wat hulle se werkers in kwesbare sektore soos huiswerkers en tuinwerkers as ook plaaswerkers waardeer en hulle meer as die voorgestelde minimumloon betaal en dat hulle nie die lone sal verlaag nie en ons bedank hulle daarvoor. Maar ons weet ook die teendeel is so waar, dat daar baie werkgewers is wat geweet het dat die nasionale minimumloon sal R20 per uur wees en hulle alreeds voor die implementering daarvan die lone van die werkers verlaag het en diegene wat hulle nie aangestel het, het hulle ver onderkant die nasionale minimumloon aangestel. So dit is waarom het belangrik is dat ons hierdie amendment moet deurvoer, sodat ons seker maak dat mense beskerm kan word in die proses. En ons verwerp dit ten sterkste dat daar werkgewers was wat onwettig opgetree het en oneties deur hulle se werkers te benadeel in die verband. Met die wysigingswetgewing wat ons vandag dus wil instel, wil ons seker maak dat werkers beskerming terugwerke na die 1 Mei 2017 moet kry en skuldige werkgewers aan die pen moet ry vir hulle verkeerde dade. To date, thousands of cases have now been lodged at the CCMA by workers whose employers are refusing to abide by the National Minimum Wage Act, and that's a great point of concern. As the caring ANC government, we don't want hundreds of thousands of vulnerable workers losing out on benefits that they were originally entitled to. Agbare adjunct speaker, as die ANC wys ons dus weer eens dat ons voortdurend ernstig is om die lewens te verbeter van ons mense wat geaffekteer is deur armoede, lae inkomstes, ongelykhede en baie ander sosiale uitdagings, omdat ons weet dat baie hiervan geërf is van die apartheidsregering. Ons maan dus ons gemeenskappe en getroue ondersteuners en lede van die ANC aan om hulle nie te laat mislei deur Kong politieke partye nie en dat hulle weer eens hulle se mandaat aan die ANC moet hernie deur wel ANC te stem op die 8de Mei, want ons weet die ANC is die enigste politieke party wat werklik omgee vir die mense op grondvlak. Ek dank u.
Honorable members, the motion is that permission be given to the Portfolio Committee on Labour to proceed with the legislative proposal. Are there any objections? Yes, Honorable Member?
Rele EFF re ganetša papa.
All right, that will be noted. The motion is agreed to. The Secretary will read the third order.
Consideration of report of Standing Committee on Finance on Carbon Tax Bill.
Honorable Tandi, you might as well go straight to the podium.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Honorable members, good afternoon. Honorable members, the carbon tax bill debate takes place a week after the President stood at this podium to address us by giving us exactly what the ANC-led government was able to do based on the promises he made at this podium last year. We thank the President for being able to report back to the nation about the achievables that the ANC government promised last year. Therefore, the ANC government is a government hard at work. And this also happens a day before the Minister of Finance will present to us the budget. And as we discuss this bill, in this fiscal year, this bill will provide us with the opportunity to explain why we legislate for greenhouse gas emissions, both in an environmental and a fiscal context. One can never have adequate time to elaborate on the impact of climate change on our world and the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. and taking cue from our president, who is action-orientated, South Africa is implementing COP15 commitments we made to reduce carbon footprint by 34% by 20 manje. Honorable Chief Whip Sienza manje. Just to give background and context from a fiscal perspective, this bill introduces the polluter pay principle. I think this House agrees in principle that the time has arrived that people who pollute our environment must face consequences of their actions. This process is not a punitive process, but a process to teach people to take action through taxation to the benefit of the fiscus and the poor. And therefore, it is imperative for the House to understand that the carbon tax bill will be complemented by a package of tax incentives and revenue measures that will minimize impact in the first phase up to 2022. The design of the carbon tax also provides significant tax-free emissions allowances ranging from 60% for the first phase. The bill will also measure the calorific value for our coal, determine carbon tax payable, and determine allowances and thresholds. This bill will also ensure alignment to our carbon budget system. The practical and operational consideration will be made to ensure effective alignment. The committee should also raise upfront that the DA has reservations to the bill. How interesting. There are reservations wanted to take into consideration economic development, Honorable Chief Whip, at the expense of our climate. How hypocritical. They also wanted government to ring-fence the tax collected, whereas we have a central revenue financing system that allocates tax collected to all government programs. But in this case, they only wanted business to benefit through this ring-fencing. How interesting. The National Treasury will also work in conjunction with the Department of Environmental Affairs to implement and administer the carbon tax. And in terms of the Money Bills and Related Matters Act, it is required that an amendment should be effected to ensure a balance between revenue, expenditure, and borrowing. Therefore, all revenue collected should be subjected to this law. Honorable members, lest we forget our experience with the recent drought, experienced right here in the Western Cape. Climate change is real. Rising water levels is real. Therefore, it is important to nurture our environment. And South Africa has, as a signatory to COP15 in Copenhagen, is committed to establish an environmentally friendly trade environment. However, South Africa will not sacrifice job creation by introducing laws that are detrimental to the South African labor force. Therefore, we have taken into consideration the issue of job preservation by ensuring that as we fulfill our international obligations, we do so within a South African-friendly framework. Therefore, by introducing tax incentives to companies that report 60% reduction is part of this principle. Also, by applying the tax system through a phase-in approach is to minimize South African companies against trade exposure to unfair and uncompetitive behavior against other companies worldwide. We therefore have thresholds determined not on international benchmarking system, but on our very own determined standards. Therefore, honorable members, Honorable Philima Pulane will speak more in detail about the work done by the Department of Environmental Affairs through its research work to determine the tax that we have put in place. And he will further elaborate on the environmental issues. The ANC-led government, honorable members, is a caring government and will continue to do so by ensuring that health is protected and only South Africans extend the mandate of the African National Congress to further pursue the strategic objective of building a non-racial, non-sexist, a prosperous South Africa, not a South Africa that represents a specific sector only. The African National Congress, on the 8th of May, as it has always got the support of the people, will express its gratitude as the people show its confidence to it as the people always do so. We don't take this expression for granted and promise to improve on our weaknesses. As the President has demonstrated last week, we are not in the business of not implementing our promises, and we are therefore on target on our policy. Hence, we are implementing this carbon tax bill before 2022, Honorable Chief Whip. Therefore, I repeat, siyenza manje, vote ANC, amandla.
Honorable Liz, I know it's your chance right now. Please give me a short moment in the spirit of correcting our decisions as we go along. Earlier on the motion that permission be given to the Portfolio Committee on Labor to proceed with legislative proposals, we noted the objection of the EFF, and I should have proceeded to say that it is therefore agreed to, and I'm now saying so. Is that okay? Thank you very much. This is now said. The table correctly pointed it out. I wanted to say that. It's your turn now, sir. Mnumzan, awukhulume
nathi. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable members, the South African economy is in a crisis like we have not seen since the demise of apartheid. There are 9.7 million South Africans who are unemployed in South Africa today. The majority of those, 6.1 million South Africans, are under the age of 34 years. Unless there's a major change in the way that the economy is managed, these 6.1 million young South Africans will never in their lifetimes find permanent employment and will remain a responsibility of the state instead of being a contributor to the economy and thus the creation of jobs. South Africa has been brought to its knees by many ANC failures, such as rampant corruption, ANC cadre deployment of incapable people in key positions, despicable trade union influence, and in government and plain stupid ANC policies. One of the biggest and most evil failures of the ANC government has been the calculated destruction of Eskom's ability to provide electricity for South Africa's economy. Eskom has systematically replaced highly skilled staff with ANC cadres who by and large are not capable of doing the job, and many of whom have simply been looters on a grand scale. And now taxpayers, through extortion, are having to pay for this unprecedented scale of mismanagement and thievery. There can be no questions that one of the key factors that has resulted in low investment levels and thus low economic growth is the high tax regime in South Africa. Over the past 2 years, there have been some significant tax increases that have not resulted in any additional revenue. In fact, revenue has decreased. These tax buoyancy levels have got worse, and taxpayers are getting to the point, if not already there, where they simply don't see the value in producing the additional earnings when so much of these hard-earned earnings will be lost in the myriad and number of direct and hidden taxes. If we are to avoid further stagnation in the economic growth in South Africa, we simply can't afford any further taxes. What South Africa needs is not extra taxes. Instead, we need a decrease in taxes in order to stimulate the economy and create the jobs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Honorable Yako.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. There are many things that we are getting wrong as a government. There are many things that we are getting wrong as this country. And one of those things is to negate or to degenerate the seriousness of climate change. And it is our responsibility to secure the future, not only for our citizens, but also for the future of this country. Honorable Chairperson, the EFF welcomes the introduction of the carbon tax bill. The greatest challenge facing humanity today is injudicious use of finite fossil fuels for development, leaving behind immeasurable damage to our environment and causing irreparable harm to the ozone layer, exposing all of us to an inevitable, slow and painful demise. This foolish mass suicide sold as development must be arrested if we are to survive as a humanity. At the moment, science tells us that if we fail to arrest and reverse global warming in the next 12 years, our planet will face a climate apocalypse never faced before, affecting at least 15% of sub-Saharan Africa, leading to a near collapse of the agricultural system, to new diseases, and inevitable death of millions of people. We are also told that the rate of the temperature rise in Southern Africa is twice the global rate. Therefore, we need supernatural commitment to cut down our carbon emission finite fuels. If we are to have a chance at survival as a species, we need to rethink our way of viewing development. We need to move away from burning fossil fuels for our energy needs. And for this reason, we do need a legislative mechanism to impose stiffer taxes on those who continue emitting large quantities of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. To have reasonable prospect of escaping the impacts of climate change, we need to restrict global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We need to cut carbon dioxide emissions by at least 45% by 2030. This must be coupled by introducing legislative measure to force companies to embark on ecologically sustainable development initiatives. The dependence on coal for our energy needs, despite known dangers, is the most tragic of our current development growth and path. There is no reason we do not have properly developed renewable energy sector in South Africa. It is possible to make transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to renewable energy-based economy within a decade, if we have a political will to do so. We would have liked this bill to have placed legislative obligations on companies and proactively partake in the creation of an ecologically sustainable society. This they can do by leading a massive program of tree planting around areas where they operate. As much as we support the bill, we do not have as much confidence in the ability of the ANC to monitor its implementation. We do not have confidence that the ANC will not take bribes from the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, therefore rendering this whole exercise futile. But in principle and for the sake of common future, we do support this bill. Thank you.
IFP, Honorable Hlengwa. Khuleko.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, it is widely accepted that the Paris Climate Agreement signed in 2015 set the stage for worldwide climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies to be implemented by participating state parties in post-2020 climate change governance through their pre-conference intended nationally determined contributions. The carbon tax bill before us today, which gives effect to the polluter pays principle, is draft legislation aimed not only at mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, but more importantly, ensuring that South Africa as a party to the Paris Agreement meets its nationally determined contributions. Carbon tax, which is a treasury initiative, which once implemented will be in addition to corporate tax and apply to entities that exceed the threshold of carbon emissions for a particular activity. As such, one of the drawbacks of this tax is not only financial in an already struggling economy, but also an additional administrative burden on both companies and an already ineffective SARS. Now, if we take a closer look at South Africa's Paris nationally determined competencies, we find it to be prima facie contradictory in that it is nothing more than a summary for policymakers of national policy, and that it is internally contradictory that, amongst others, it claims that South Africa's government is nearing completion of 2 emission-efficient power stations, Modipo and Kusile. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but experts are saying that if these 2 power stations are online by 2025, we'll be lucky. Secondly, the idea that these power emissions are emission efficient is only comparison to the currently very inefficient, if they are actually working at all, coal-powered Eskom power stations, which emit about 30 million tons of carbon emissions each year. Yet in the NDC, South Africa talks about decarbonizing the electricity centers in South Africa by 2050. So the question then becomes to government, how do you intend to decarbonize one of the biggest greenhouse gas emissions, electricity supplies emitters in South Africa by 2050, when each of the above-mentioned power plants have a lifespan of over 75 years, which effectively means that these power supply stations will be emitting gases arguably up until the year 2100 before they are decommissioned. Honorable Deputy Speaker, the carbon tax bill that is before us is a bouquet of national mitigation policies which were last updated in 2020, which means essentially they are out of date. And there are many founded criticisms about the basing of current legislation on out-of-date policy. So how will this bill be effectively mitigate carbon emissions when the biggest polluters, such as Eskom, a government entity, questionably will it be effective? So, Honorable Deputy Speaker, whilst the IFP supports this bill, we are extremely concerned about the information which informs South Africa's greenhouse gas emissions targets are met that are incorrect. There must be an immediate audit and policy update, otherwise this legislation may prove itself to be ineffective. I thank you.
Honorable Sheikima.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. The National Freedom Party notes the carbon tax bill tabled here today. Now, Honorable Deputy Speaker, the Minister of Finance in Parliament on the 20th of November 2018 made a statement that climate change poses the greatest threat to mankind. But let me start off by saying, while the Minister said that, for many years as the National Freedom Party in this very House, and I'm glad that the Minister of Health is here, and he's going to listen to this. We have been complaining about emissions in the Meerwent, Wentworth, Jacobs, Bluff, and Lamontville areas, with a very high level of cancer, tuberculosis, and lung infections, and nothing has happened. Now, for me, that is contradictory. On the one hand, we say it's going to have an effect on humankind or mankind. On the other, it is continuously being done in South Africa in front of our eyes, and we do very little or nothing. Added to that is the fact that at the UK Zen University did some research about a decade ago, and to date, nothing has been released. But the communities surrounding these Engen, Mondi, Sapref refineries are affected, and very little or nothing. Now, what we find here, Deputy Speaker, is the emphasis seems to be on tax, on money, on revenue, rather than the reduction of these emission of carbon. We believe as the NFP that more emphasis should be put in reducing this emission rather than, and there is clearly no indication or guarantee that by increasing or putting in these taxes that you're going to reduce those emissions. Remember, all that is going to happen. These big industries are going to pass that cost to those economically disadvantaged. The entire process, in our view as the National Freedom Party, did not give enough opportunity for the disadvantaged economically to participate in this process. In 2015, we were ranked 18 on the list of the worst greenhouse gas emitters in the world. Now, do we know, Deputy Speaker, why this process was delayed for over 8 years? Is because big industry, like these refineries, were actually funding. They were funding a process to actually deny that, in fact, this had an effect on climate change. So clearly what we are saying, even with the tax that you're putting, together with the incentive and the allowances that you're going to give, clearly it means there's going to be very little or no tax. So it's not really going to serve the purpose. As the National Freedom Party, we cannot support this. We believe put the interest in the lives of the people more than the money that you're talking about.
Honorable Madisha.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, COPE agrees that climate change currently poses the greatest threat facing humankind. By all accounts, South Africa will worryingly warm at twice the global average. Already, the effects of climate change are to be felt here at home. We agree that South Africa must play its role in the global effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In this regard, we note that we have, in terms of the Paris Agreement on climate change, undertaken to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by close to half within the next 6 years. This is an onerous commitment, and as COPE, we question whether the commitment made will be realized given the provisions of this bill in its final form. Greenhouse gas emissions and the resultant global warming harm the world and South Africa socially and environmentally. The impact and consequences of global warming are more pronounced on the poor and vulnerable than on the rich and resourced. Carbon taxation is essentially a fiscal tool that puts a price on greenhouse emissions made through the production of goods and services. The tax, its rates, rebates, and exemptions aim to change behavior and reduce emissions. The conundrum we face as a nation is the need to meet our reduction in emissions commitment in times when we need to create conditions conducive to meaningful economic growth and job creation, and this following a decade of economicide induced by the governing party, unfortunately. This is not an ideal situation and requires a fine balance, a trade-off between the need for growth and environmental sustainability. Time will tell whether the proposed phased-in kids' glove approach is the right posture to adopt. Apart herefrom, COPE would have liked to have seen the ring fencing of carbon tax revenue for use or investment in greener energy, production technologies, and industries that will reduce greenhouse emissions and improve energy supply. Thank you, Deputy Chair.
Honorable Mapulani.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Speaker, honorable members of the House, fellow South Africans. As I ascend this podium, Honorable Deputy Speaker, I'm tempted to ask a question about exactly what is the position of the DA on this matter. The DA in the Portfolio Committee of Environmental Affairs fully support the introduction of the carbon tax bill as one of the instruments that will help us to mitigate the effects of climate change. The DA in the Portfolio Committee or Standing Committee on Finance does not support this bill. So can the real DA please stand up? Honorable Deputy Speaker, on the 8th of October...
Honourable Member?
The Honourable Member asked a question. I'm more than happy to provide the answer to it.
No. That's rhetorical. Take your seat, Honourable Member.
Rhetorical. Okay.
Honourable Deputy Speaker, on the 8th of October last year, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a preeminent scientific world body tasked with assessing the impacts, risk and possible response option to climate change, produced a special report on global warming of 1.5% degrees. The special report, which was written by 91 scientists and review editors from over 40 countries, makes a compelling argument for world leaders and governments to rapidly introduce far-reaching measures to mitigate and limit the impacts of climate change. The special report makes a critical finding that global emissions of carbon dioxide will need to fall by 45% from 2010 levels by 2030, reaching net zero around 2050 in order to attain the target set by the Paris Agreement. This and many other reports of the IPCC provides irrefutable scientific data that confirms that emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are changing the Earth climates, potentially imposing a significant global cost that will fall disproportionately on the poorest of the poor. Rising temperatures, erratic rainfall, and extreme weather events are likely to take a heavy toll on South Africa, with growing losses on human and financial resources, particularly from droughts and flooding. It is against this background, Honorable Deputy Speaker, that industries and households will have to reduce their negative impact on the environment by implementing far-reaching changes to the way people live and work, with carbon tax playing a decisive role in creating the necessary behavioral change, as well as changes in industrial processes towards a low carbon and ultimately a zero carbon economy. Honorable members, climate change is not a hoax, a figment in someone's imagination, neither is it a scarecrow invented by scientists. Climate change is a reality that requires all countries of the world, especially the biggest polluting ones like ourselves, to make sacrifices to take concrete, practical climate actions to transform to a low-carbon economy. The National Climate Change Response Policy White Paper of 2011 expresses our country's policy and political commitment to dealing with climate change. It proposes a variety of plans and initiatives to mitigate South Africa's vulnerability to growing threats of climate change and measures to regulate the impact thereof. The White Paper on Climate Change commits South Africa at the international level to reduce emissions relative to a business-as-usual scenario by 34% by 2020 and 42% by 2025, as our country's contribution to an international effort to limit global warming relative to pre-industrial times to less than 2% degrees Celsius. Although this commitment is conditional on the provision of external financing, it has become increasingly clear that South Africa needs to implement certain domestic emission reduction measures to safeguard its economy and enhance the well-being of its people from ensuing threats of climate change. The White Paper identifies the use of carbon tax as one of the key instruments in the context of the carbon budget approach, which entails specifying the desired emission reduction outcomes for specific sectors consistent with the benchmark national greenhouse gas emission range trajectory. The release of the carbon tax policy paper in May 2013 was the culmination of a process that started in the 2000s, signaling South Africa's commitment to introduce instruments to mitigate the effects of climate change. In fact, carbon tax is highly favored in designing climate change mitigation policies, as it is an easy-to-implement instrument with limited demands on administrative capacity. Honorable members, let me deal with the distinction between the concept of carbon tax and carbon budget, because they've often been confused to mean the same thing. Although the two instruments have the same objective of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, they are, however, completely different. The carbon tax policy as designed by National Treasury is intended to provide a price signal to producers and consumers of carbon-intensive products and to create an incentive to invest in cleaner technologies. The carbon tax is expected to come into operation this year, 2019, at a headline rate of 120 rands per ton of CO2 emission. Carbon tax is designed to reduce the output of greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere, with the goal of protecting the health and well-being of our people by increasing the cost of greenhouse gas emissions. The bill hopes to curb consumption, reduce the demand of fossil fuels, and push more companies towards creating environmentally alternatives and/or renewable sources. We believe that the proposed carbon tax is not too high to pose a threat to growth, but that it is enough to provide motivation for major emitters to look for ways to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. We have spent too much time talking. It is now time to act. On the other hand, a series of carbon budgets were designed by the Department of Environmental Affairs, envisaged to provide a greenhouse gas emissions allowance, or what is called a cap, against which physical emissions arising from the operations of a company during a defined period will be tracked. In the period to 2020, the carbon budget will not be a compliance instrument, but rather will be used to increase understanding of the emissions profile of participating companies and to establish monitoring, reporting, and verification processes. Accordingly, the first phase of carbon budgets in South Africa from 2016 to 2020 is being implemented as a voluntary pilot in preparation for a second mandatory phase to commence in 2021. Phase 1 has just started, does not include compliance measures. The decision to start with a voluntary phase was influenced by a lack of appropriate legal instrument. Carbon budgets are allocated a selection of individual entities in the form of cumulative target level of GHG emissions that they are permitted to emit over a period of 5-year carbon budget period. Beyond 2020, they are expected to become compulsory, more so when the climate change bill currently underway in the executive becomes a law on act of parliament. Honorable Deputy Speaker, we must expeditiously transform to a low carbon sources of energy to power economy in order to remain internationally competitive. And therefore, policy levers such as the carbon tax are crucial in facilitating greenhouse gas emissions reduction technology and innovation. This is of uttermost importance as our national economy is highly dependent on energy-intensive production and use, considering that we are among the 30 largest emitters of greenhouse gases globally, which makes our economy extremely vulnerable due to large carbon footprints of our production communities or goods, and also long haul or distance to some of our main trading partners, especially those up the north. It is important to recognize that efforts made in climate mitigation and adaptation are opportunities for a just transition in South Africa. Whilst a just transition can be applied to a number of sectors, the fundamental components revolves around change, a movement from the status quo to something better. There are several settings for this transformation, but most along the broad lines of shifting from environmentally and socially damaging practices to those of a cleaner, restorative economy, something that is entrenched as a fundamental Bill of Rights in our Constitution. So the discourse on the just transition, Honorable Deputy Speaker, cannot mainly be confined to trade unions or non-profit organizations and academic institutions, as inappropriately assumed by some of us. In fact, our government is at the center of a debate on the question of a just transition, as it deals with the overall health, well-being, and welfare of our people, which everywhere is the prerogative of government regulation. We are doing so in this case by the presentation of the carbon tax bill to this House, which the ANC support, and all other parties, it looks like, excluding the DA, will be supporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Ngwenya. Honorable, wait a minute. Honorable Carlo, guys, your list is wrong. Go ahead, Honorable Member.
Deputy Speaker,
No,
the century-long carbon tax bill aims at managing the inevitable climate change impact through interventions that build and sustain South Africa's social, economic, and environmental resilience and emergency response capacity. The bill is being touted by the Kyoto Protocol signatory. In the mold of South Africa, South Africa has committed to reduce greenhouse emissions by 5% from 2008 to 2012. According to the Carbon Dioxide Information Analysis Center, South Africa is the 13th largest emitting country. This bill, regrettably, is unmindful of these realities, including our commitment to the Sustainable Development Agenda and the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. How far has the bill gone in addressing the Paris Agreement to combat climate change? Have we allowed our unsound economic outlook to displace environmental justice? Deputy Speaker, the bill offers allowances to emitters up to 95%. According to the bill, the carbon tax levied in respect of the sum of the greenhouse gas emissions will be 120 rand a ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. However, because of tax-free allowances, it will result in an effective tax of 48 rand a ton. This is an affront to the global goal of limiting temperatures increase to below 2 degrees. It is an affront to the future generation who will inherit a degraded environment. Honorable Deputy Speaker, the silence by the Ministry of Environmental Affairs is also deafening. It has a critical role to champion climate conservation and sustainable development. The late Ms. Mulewa would have fought tooth and nail against this less punitive bill. In line with our commitment to global sustainable development, environmental justice, and food security, we are reluctant to support this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable GSA Ngwenya.
Chair, the carbon tax bill has been almost a decade in the making. It must be appreciated that a great deal of consultation has taken place, and the Chair of the Finance Committee has allowed comment from stakeholders right up to the day of voting on the bill, which is unusual. The minority view is also recorded in the report. We cannot, however, support the carbon tax bill. The honourable member from the ANC suggested that he'd like for the real DA to please stand up. Unfortunately, I am obliged to stand, otherwise I would have quite liked to demonstrate the real DA does not need to stand up. We can take you on lying down. Let's be clear about what it is we are in fact supporting today, because the DA has long been a champion for the environment. Where we govern, our climate change policies and environmental strategies provide models for the rest of the country to emulate. We care about a sustainable future. So what is it that we oppose? We stand in opposition to bad policy, which this bill is, and which stands to undermine the good intentions upon which it is built. An American 19th century judge opined that a government ill-executed, whatever may be its theory, must in practice be a bad government. On one hand, there remain serious doubts that introducing a carbon tax is the appropriate approach. And on the other, for those who advocate for a carbon tax, there are concerns that the tax is too low to be effectual. It is a truism that when you attempt to appeal to both sides, you end up convincing neither. This bill is exactly that, a policy nebbish. Many of us in these benches will know that the trouble with broad churches is that all are welcome. The search for consensus eventually obliterates truth. That's exactly what has happened with this bill. 10 years of hand-wringing discussion, well-intentioned to appeal to all, has unfortunately borne a limp-wristed policy. What this amounts to is that this tax, which is intended to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, may actually just be a load of policy hot air. Considering that the government will subsidize the initial implementation of the carbon tax, what the full effects of the bill will be remain to be seen. Perhaps it is not the right time, or perhaps it is cowardice. But as usual, the tough questions and answers are too tough to deal with right now and are being kicked down the line. While South Africa must move towards enhanced energy efficiency, it needs to do so in a manner that takes cognizance of the country's stage of economic development and our global contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. The first period, as expressed in the bill, is a trial with a view to 2022 to adjusting rates and tax-free thresholds. But the door to re-evaluate the carbon tax as a viable mechanism in South Africa's carbon reduction strategy should also remain open. With the bill as it stands, if the trial fails, it is not clear that South Africa will be able to pivot quickly. A carbon tax is not the only carbon pricing instrument available to achieve lower emissions. We cannot be so unimaginative as to assume that there's only one way to crack an egg. Ironically, we cannot be lectured to from the ANC about consequences. The DA, in fact, is the party of consequences. Honourable Tobias tells us about the polluter pays principle. I suggest her party learns first to master the corrupter pays principle. To suggest that those who oppose the carbon tax bill are opposed to environmental progress and reform is to flog a straw man. Not enough has been done for an emissions trading system in South Africa. The difference is that carbon taxes are explicit in creating a fixed price for carbon, whereas emissions trading systems ensure that economy-wide emissions are kept below a certain emissions cap and allow the market to set the appropriate price for carbon. Furthermore, the economic impact of the carbon tax hinges heavily on the design of the tax and the manner in which Treasury utilizes the revenues collected. There is concern that there is no guarantee that tax collected will be channeled back into the economy in a manner that mitigates deindustrialization and invests in renewable technologies. It was suggested via numerous public submissions that revenue collected be ring-fenced. Carbon prices generate government revenue, which can be used to increase green spending, compensate adversely affected industries and communities, or be redistributed back to the public. Numerous studies reveal that the way in which the carbon pricing revenues are spent plays an important role in determining whether a carbon pricing initiative will be successful. Studies show that ambitious carbon pricing is often correlated with high political trust and low levels of corruption. The recommendations are that if trust is low, revenue should thus be recycled using a transparent, trust-boosting strategy to enhance its acceptability. There is no doubt that in South Africa, political trust is low and that corruption levels are high. This bill does nothing to guarantee how carbon revenues will be spent, a key factor in the success of carbon pricing models globally. Not only that, but the carbon tax bill does not include a flexible legislative framework, as it does not allow for companies to achieve 100% tax-free status. In Switzerland, where carbon tax policies have been affected, revenues have been used to invest in green technologies and to direct transfers back to households and firms. I repeat, there's no such mechanism or such provisions for this to be guaranteed in the current articulation of the bill. So it is not clear whose interests, in fact, this bill is intended to serve, except the appearance of doing something, while in fact doing nothing at all. It will not distinguish us. It will place us amongst those who have tried this policy and failed. It places no safeguards to ensure increased investments in renewable technologies, nor does the framework incentivize companies to the fullest extent. After 10 years, what is in front of us today is a policy that remains mediocre and one born of expedience. South Africans deserve better, and this policy must be opposed with the full contempt it deserves.
Honorable Abraham Sintantiso.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Just to start off with the inputs by the opposition here. Honorable Deputy Speaker, just to lower the excitement of Honorable Gallo here, that the voters of the African National Congress now know better. In the past, they had mistaken the AIC for the ANC. So on the 8th of May, there's no luck. You must know, Honorable Member, that studies that culminated in this bill were conducted not only by National Treasury, but that the Department of Environmental Affairs was also included. I will come back to the lady, Honorable Ngwenya, Honorable Speaker. Safe to say, for now, that we cannot expect the Honorable Member to see policy in the African National Congress when she said the DA, where she is not serious about policy. So, xa kunje komanzi, kobeka phi kowomileyo. Honorable Deputy Speaker, the ANC supports the carbon tax bill, and we do submit and admit, Honorable Deputy Speaker, that it took a lot of balancing between what business wants, what environment activists want, and most importantly for the African National Congress, it is what the people, the majority of the downtrodden, the poor, really need. The World Climate Change Summit hosted in our country in 2011 noted that South Africa leads non-petroleum countries in carbon emissions, 20 times higher than even the US. As Honorable Ngwenya has said as well, the committee consulted widely on the bill. The result was the change in implementation dates, and as a committee, we were misunderstood and made it to the Daily Maverick for all the wrong reasons. We have since set the record straight with the Honorable Lady, Ms. Gashin, and she understands that we do care about the environment. Honorable Deputy Speaker, Climate change is intricately linked to almost all facets of our society, particularly socio-economic progression, as resources such as water, feedstock in the form of food, fiber, biodiversity, amongst others, determine the production potential of many sectors of the country, of the economy, which in turn affect human development aspirations of the country. There is evidence that extreme weather events in South Africa are increasing, with heat wave conditions found to be more likely, dry spell durations lengthening slightly, and rainfall intensity increasing. The associated impacts primarily have a bearing on economic and social aspects of our development. The South African economy is dependent on primary sectors such as agriculture, particularly mineral extractives, which are natural resource dependent, and energy intensive, with the energy generation being very important as it is also subject to climate variability and change. The NDP's vision for the future, which includes access to affordable food, safe and affordable and reliable water, and energy services, cannot be based on an economic model or assumptions of infinite availability of these and other resources. Ons is teleurgesteld aan die DA. Ons het geweet hulle gaan verskil. En komitee het hulle soveel gehad om by te voeg. Ons het gehoop dat soos die ANC hulle gaan met die arme mense staan. Maar nee, soos altyd, die DA staan en stem saam met die ryk. Honorable Deputy Speaker, the carbon tax bill gives effect to the polluter pays principle, as Honorable Tobias and others indicated. The carbon tax will assist in at least cost manner in reducing GHG emissions and assuring that South Africa will meet its NDC commitments as part of its ratification at the 2015 Paris Agreement. Thus, the carbon tax is an essential element of South Africa's commitment to the agreement as part of a package of measures to mitigate climate change. It is not the only one, but part of what is being done. The carbon tax is intended as an instrument to help drive down emissions in cost-effective and dynamic ways over the medium to long term. South Africa's triple challenge of unemployment, poverty, and inequality must be considered. Besilindele ke ukuba iDA noko izawuthi xa iwuxhasa lo mthetho isondele ebantwini kulamanqanaba, but bayazibonisa on the eve of general elections that they have nothing to do with ordinary people, but everything to do with big business. In his response to the debate on the SONA, President Ramaphosa emphasized the importance of dealing with climate change to protect the poor and vulnerable in our society. The President confirmed the ANC's commitment to ensuring that South Africa leads in the fight against climate change. There was support for the policy certainty provided on the carbon tax, both in the second draft carbon tax bill circulated for comments in December 2017 and in the February 18th budget speech. Some stakeholders noted that the carbon tax is a critical tool in South Africa's climate change toolbox, which is necessary to meet both international obligations and address local constitutional and developmental requirements. The draft carbon tax bill was commended as a landmark piece of legislation to guide future efforts, as the carbon tax was viewed as a critical tool for pricing GHG emissions as a key element of the national mitigation strategy. In addition, stakeholders argued that a lower level of economic growth does not obviate the need for carbon tax to incentivize further reductions in overall greenhouse gas emissions. Several stakeholders, including NGOs and academia, were concerned that the bill does not adequately implement the polluter pays principle or reflect the urgency of the risk posed. They stated that the bill will not sufficiently promote a meaningful reduction of GHG emissions and that this failure contradicts the constitutional right to an environment not harmful to one's health or well-being and the duty to take reasonable measures to prevent environmental pollution. The main aim of the carbon tax is to put a price on the environmental and economic damages caused by excessive emissions of greenhouse gases. A secondary aim is to change the behavior of firms and consumers by encouraging uptake of cost-effective, low-carbon alternatives. The fact that the current levels of emissions might be within the target range does not mean that the carbon tax should be zero or negate the need for a carbon tax. Analysis has shown that GHG emissions are closely related to GDP growth, and if we do not take precautionary action, we will likely to exceed the target range by as early as 2025. Dear Lopende, Kopege, Weierig, dear die Reikers, om terug te keer op gasvrystelling is een van die redes waarom die wetsontwerp hier is vandag. There was support for the additional revenue recycling measures, such as the expansion of free basic electricity, funding alternative energy sources, and the expansion of public transport. And it was suggested that these measures should be included in the bill. Several suggestions made by stakeholders include targeted revenue recycling for the benefit of rural agricultural areas. There is biomass-based renewable energy options which can assist both GHG emission reduction and job creation. Honorable member of the DA, job creation in poorer regions of the economy. Revenue could be used to facilitate investments in core processing of waste and give effect to integrated waste management, circular economy, as well as mitigating coal-based emissions from cement. Channeling revenues to support small and emerging businesses and climate change mitigation startup. And revenues should be earmarked to provide finance for community-based renewable energy installation in low-income areas. National Treasury notes the recommendation to remove the vehicle emissions tax with the introduction of the carbon tax. National Treasury will also consider harmonizing the taxes and reviewing the combined impact of carbon-related taxes, including the motor vehicle emissions tax, and possibly phasing down or phasing out the tax. However, this will only be considered during the second phase of the carbon tax, once the effective carbon tax rate is sufficiently high so as to fully account for external costs of carbon emissions. It is misleading to talk about double taxation given the low effective carbon tax rate during the first phase. The reduction of cost is not only the reason that offsets would be used. The availability of suitable projects and positive impacts that can be achieved through alternative investments are also reasons that are not referred to. Any mechanisms to reduce any GHG emissions in the least cost manner would be allowable. Increased flexibility on a variety of fronts must be considered. South Africa, Honorable Deputy Speaker, remains a dual economy with one of the most highest Gini coefficients in the world, perpetuating both inequality and exclusion. Poverty and inequality, both exacerbated by unemployment, are South Africa's most significant challenges. Lack of access to natural resources, a two-tiered education system, a dual health system, discriminatory spatial planning, and other socio-economic dimensions are some of the aspects that demonstrate inequality in our society. Undoing both inequality and poverty remains the major preoccupation of the African National Congress in the democratic South Africa. In conclusion, Honorable Deputy Speaker. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Honorable the Deputy Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Deputy.
Oh, Deputy Speaker. Thank you very much. Honorable Ngwenya is asking, what if we lose? What if we lose? Now, the question we're posing as ANC, how can we win if we do not play? That is our posture, is that you can only win if you play. And we just want to say to Honorable Ngwenya, victories are not direct results of mere paralysis of ideation. It's ideation, post-ideation, action, during action, adjustment, and then victories. So our posture as ANC, we know in order to win, we must play. Honorable members, as mentioned by our president, I quote, open quote, unless we tackle climate change, we will not be able to meet our development objectives, close quotes. Climate change poses greatest threat facing humankind, and South Africa intends to play its role as part of the global effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enable us to meet our commitments as agreed in Paris Agreement. Under the late Minister Edna Molewa, we submitted our national determined contributions, commitments, under the Paris Agreement, which requires our emissions to peak from 2020 to 25, plateau from 2025 to 2035, and declare from 2036 onwards, because we know only if we play that we can win. The NDC knows the carbon tax as an integral part of the package of policy measures to help us reduce emissions and meet our commitments. Deputy Speaker, the carbon tax aims to ensure that costs of damages caused by the emissions of greenhouse, like carbon dioxide and methane, are included in the price of high carbon emitting goods and services. The carbon tax bill gives effect to the polluter pay principle and help to ensure that both firms and consumers take these costs into account in their future production, consumption, and investment decisions. The tax will help to promote the uptake of alternative low-carbon fuels, renewables, and energy efficiency measures by both producers and consumers. The introduction of carbon tax is an important first step to help encourage our transition to a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy and create opportunities for new innovative industries and business models. Investment in renewables, green technologies, and the growth of some sectors will benefit from this intervention and make us more competitive in the meeting of our future climate change challenges. If we do not take action now to start reduce emission, the overall cost to our economy of reducing emissions are likely to increase significantly in future. As we speak, climate change is damaging humanity, and we can only tackle it if we do something about it, not if we ask what happens if we lose. The carbon tax bill is the culmination of an extensive stakeholder consultation process over the past 9 years. Following the consultation, substantial changes were made to the policy to take into account stakeholder comments, and additional technical changes were made to the bill during the consultation of the Standing Committee on Finance. To conclude, I just want to restate, as ANC, the question we are posing: how can we win if we do not play? And we have opted to play because the only victory comes from action. The only adjustment comes from experience in activity. And the only way we can win is when we play. That's why we are supporting the bill for implementation so that we can deal with climate change. I would like to emphasize that climate change is a reality, and we will have to prepare to operate in carbon-constrained economy over the medium to long term. Operating on business as usual basis is no longer an option. We must therefore take urgent and appropriate action to curb our emissions to help transition our economy onto a low carbon growth path. The carbon tax is a part of broader package of mitigation policy measures under national climate change response policy to help achieve our national determined contribution to target in a cost-effective manner. And we dare again emphasize, the reason other parties even lie about their stats of employment creation, growth, is because they are always caught in ideation. What happens if we lose? And they forget that they have never acted, they have always been asking, thus misleading the country about the stats of Western Cape, because they are caught in the gallery of what can we do, what happens if we lose. Now we're answering questions. We know we will win if we act. Thank you very much.
Honorable members, I will request the table here to read and give this debate we've just had its proper order. Please do so. Read the fourth order.
First reading debate, carbon tax bill.
Honorable members, I'm going back. Honorable member, please let me correct what happened before procedurally. I would like us to do that exactly that I have noticed. We are self-correcting now, okay? Honorable members, we've just had this, that was concluding the debate, and I want to know whether there are any objections to the bill being read the first time.
Deputy Speaker?
Yes?
You didn't put the question for the report.
I will do so.
But that comes before the bill.
I will, you
generally.
Honorable, yes, generally you are right.
So then you've got to put the report in the bill.
I'm pointing out to you that we've noticed that. We are correcting that, Honorable Member. You can't let me ask you to start afresh when it's very easy to do it quickly now. Are there any objections to the bill being read the first time?
Yes.
Okay, there being an objection, we will note that. Honorable Member. Those in favor will say aye, and those against will say no. Okay, the ayes have it.
Deputy Speaker, the DA calls for division. Thank you.
The bells will be rung for 5 minutes. Listen, no, keep this. You'll bring it when she comes. When she comes, yeah. I won't be here. Okay, thanks. Honorable members, please take your seats. I'd like to remind members that you may only vote from your allocated seat. When requested to do so, members must simply indicate their vote by pressing the appropriate button below the yes, no, abstain signs. If a member inadvertently presses the wrong button, the member may thereafter press the correct button. The last button pressed will be recorded as a member's vote when the voting session is closed by the chair. The question before the House is that the carbon tax bill be read a first time. Are all members in your allocated seats? Voting will now commence. Those in favor of the bill being read the first time should press the yes button. Those against should press the no button. Those wishing to abstain should press the abstain button. Have all members voted? Thank you. The voting session is now closed. That's fine. Your whips are looking at you and they'll indicate otherwise. We are closed. Honorable members, there are no abstentions. There's 4 noes and there's 212. The question is accordingly agreed to and the Secretary will read the bill a first time.
Carbon tax bill.
Chief Whip, honorable members, as I said earlier on, we are reordering. This is where we should have completed. We went straight to the debate instead of completing the first part, which I will ask the Secretary to read the third order.
Consideration of report of Standing Committee on Finance on Carbon Tax Bill.
I now recognize the Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
I move that the report be adopted by this House. Deputy Speaker.
The motion is that the report be adopted. Are there any objections?
Yes. Deputy Speaker, will you please note the objection of the DA? Thank you.
Okay, we will note the objections of the DA. The motion is agreed to. The Secretary will read the 5th order.
Second reading, carbon tax bill.
Are there any objections to the bill being read the second time? There's an objection, yes. We'll note the objections of the DA. The Secretary will read the bill a second time.
Carbon tax bill.
The bill will be sent to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. The next matter is the subject for discussion. The next item is subject for discussion in the name of Honorable MD Mahlobo on transforming the economy to serve the people. Honorable Mahlobo.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Speaker, Ministers and Deputy Ministers, Honorable Members, comrades and friends, fellow South Africans. Last week, on the 11th of February 2019, we as a nation took a pause and reflected on how far we've come since our icon and the father of our democracy, Nelson Mandela, was released from prison after 27 years. In his address on the 3rd of February 2005, Nelson Mandela in London, during a campaign on making poverty history, Madiba said, I quote, "Massive poverty and obscene inequality are such terrible scourges of our time, times in which the world boasts breathtaking advances in science, technology, industry, and wealth accumulation, that they have to rank alongside slavery and apartheid as social ills," I close quote. We remain on course in our journey of building a truly united, non-racial, non-sexist, democratic, and prosperous society. A lot has been achieved over the last 25 years, and South Africa is better today than it was before 1994. However, as the ANC, we are the first to admit that more still needs to be done. In 1994, we inherited an economy in deep structural crisis, trapped in a low-growth equilibrium, economic exclusion and underdevelopment. The structured exclusion of black people from economic power began in the late 1800s with the first dispossession of land. Apartheid systematically and purposefully restricted the majority of South Africans from meaningful participation in the economy. The assets of millions of our people were directly and indirectly destroyed, and access to skills and self-employment was racially restricted. The result is an economic structure that today, in essence, still excludes the vast majority of South Africans. South Africa was systematically deprived of viable business opportunities by confining the majority of African people to homelands, by racially segregating and enforcing the Group Areas Act, by the curtailment of property ownership rights of black people, and making it impossible for them to acquire assets that could serve as collateral on loan financing. And it also excluded black persons from long-run processes on capital accrual and growth. A job reservation policy was reinforced through a vast inferior education system, and this had a devastating effect on skills and positions that the majority of workers obtain in the labor market. Only a small minority gained access to higher education, technology, and professional careers were made less attainable by chronic inadequacies in teaching of maths and science in black schools. Millions of other South Africans have been particularly poorly equipped for a modernizing industrial commercial economy. It is crucial to understand the magnitude of what took place in our past, to understand why we need to act together as a nation to bring about economic transformation in the interest of all. Kunabanye kule ndlu yomshayamthetho abangafuni ukuthi-ke kwaziwe ukuthi kwenzakaleni, bayaphikisana nemithetho ukuthi-ke umnotho walelizwe leli utransforme ukuze bakwazi ukuthi idlanzana liqhubeke liqhoqhobele umnotho wethu. South African new constitution enshrine the right of all South Africans for equality and were to put specific measures. The ANC had to introduce laws like the Promotion of Equality, Prevention of Unfair Discrimination, the Employment Equity Act, the Preferential Procurement Act, the BE, and the others. Our country needs an economy that will meet the needs of all our people in a sustainable manner. This will only be possible if our economy is built on the full potential of all persons. The period since 1994, we have seen undergoing profound restructuring. In the first decade of our democracy, our economy was growing well. There was a micro-stabilization that we achieved. The economy has also been integrated in the global economy. Despite all our economic successes and the plethora of state policy strategy and programs and intervention at overcoming economic disparities, entrenched inequalities, they continue. Vast racial gender inequalities in distribution of access to wealth, income, skills, and employment persist. As a consequence, our economy to continue to perform below its potential. The doomsayers are saying that the ANC has done less. But if you look at the independent report of the Institute for Race Relations, it says that over the last 2 decades, the ANC has done well and the standard of our people have improved. It says there's a lot to be proud of, and in no way it is true that South Africa is not better than it was in 1994, or that South Africa has refused to work together to bring about change. This is substantially better society to live in than it was in 1994. We think that as a result of that progress, social and other relations remain predominantly sound. That's what the report says. The report further says that more credit must go to the entrepreneurs, investors, employers, and employees whose hard work and risk-taking generated the tax revenue that funded the free and subsidized houses and services and social welfare. Too often, the middle class are haunted as uncaring and selfish elite who have done nothing to bring about better future. They have done a great deal and deserve our credit to the report closes. It is therefore important to acknowledge that President Ramaphosa, in engaging with the number of South Africans through Presidential Summit and other forums, is proving that any ANC leader and cadre must breathe the same breath as our people, share the same future, and stay truly connected to them. In part, this is our effort to draw wisdom and potential from all citizens while striving with endless energy towards our goal of building a nation. His approach has left many of our detractors dazzled and hopeless, thus resorting to lies and vitriol as witnessed during the State of the Nation address. We have made strides in respect of the economy since 1994. Inflation has dropped from 9% from 1994 to 5.3 in 2017. The number of people that are employed by this economy has increased from 4.9 million to over 16 million. If you look at the latest labor survey report, you will know that in the fourth quarter, our results have demonstrated an increase, where more than 16.5 people are in the employment. But if you look at the performance of our provinces, Gauteng is leading, followed by Free State and Western Cape. We also note that the Commission on Employment Equity is indicating that the ANC has done well. But there are those other people who don't believe in employment equity and affirmative action. The public procurement as a purchasing power in our hands is being used to be able to push the participation of our people in the economy. We are also dealing with the question of monopolies. The Competition Act has just been amended by the President so that we can be in a position to be able to deal with monopolies, but at the very same time, give the power to the Commission to have teeth and curb those violations. South Africa's economy has been performing at an average rate of about less than 1% right now, but it remains the second largest in the continent. If you look at the other sectors of the economy, manufacturing production has increased by 1.2% as compared to 2017. And manufacturing has assisted us to be able to get out of the technical recession. And we need to do more, especially around the issues of manufacturing, because it contributes 25% of the total manufacturing capacity. The investment in mining and the indaba that was held here, mining is on the rise again. And we are looking forward in 2019 with all the commitments that have been made. When you look at international tourism, tourism expenditure has grown and be recorded at the end of 2017 to be above 277 billion rands, and of which constitute 56% of domestic and 44% international. The revision of tourism visa regime and the plans to roll out the e-visa system will enhance the potential of attending to issues of tourism and increase the growth potential. And government spending continues to be in this fashion. Every 100 rand, you have 18 rand that government is spending. In 2016-17, we have about 1.58 trillion rand that the government has contributed. When we come back later on, we'll indicate the plans of the ANC to take the economy forward. I thank you.
Mr. McPherson.
House Chairperson, the topic chosen by the ANC today is done so in the hope that it will portray a party that has spent the last 25 years in government trying to break down the barriers to inclusion and broadening opportunities for the unemployed. But we all know that this is not the case. The 9.4 million unemployed South Africans know that this is not the case. There has, however, been one government that over the last 10 years has worked tirelessly to build a capable state that creates an environment for job creation, investment facilitation, and improves access to opportunity, no matter what the color of your membership card is. The Western Cape, by every measure, both independent and by government, shows how this province has focused on getting the basics right. And what do the statistics tell us about the Western Cape? It has the lowest unemployment rate of under 20%, a full 14 points below the national average on the expanded definition. It has created 508,000 new jobs since the start of the administration's first term. If every other province had followed the lead of the Western Cape, we would be close to the 5 million job opportunities the ANC promised the country by 2020. Employment in the Western Cape grew by 24% between 2009 and 2018, well ahead of Gauteng at 18.6% and KZN at over 8%. It now has the lowest rural unemployment rate at 15.7%, a decrease of 3.4% quarter on quarter, despite the devastating drought. Think about that for a moment, colleagues. More than 8 out of 10 people living in rural areas in the Western Cape have a job. That is truly incredible. These economic gains would not have been possible without a strategic unit called the Red Tape Reduction Unit. A 1 billion rand saving has been achieved across 27 red tape interventions where bureaucracy would have otherwise killed growth. The DA is literally shredding red tape to allow more people to start businesses and create jobs. This is real transformation. You see, honourable members, where the DA is in government, we don't just talk about transforming the economy to serve our people, we actually do it. But let's compare this with the ANC's record over the last 10 years. Since 2009, unemployment has increased every single year, currently at 37%. Manufacturing as a contribution to GDP has declined to 11.8% from 13.6%. Our national debt has ballooned to 55.8% of GDP from 31.3%. We have spent 162 billion rand bailing out zombie SOEs since 2008. Eskom produces 6,000 megawatts less than it did 10 years ago, meaning we can't keep the lights on, which costs our economy 2 billion rand a day. Honourable members, this dismal performance at the expense of the unemployed is because the ANC solely focuses on transforming the economy to serve their masters in exchange for bribe packs and bottles of whiskey. To quote former MP, ANC MP Dr. Lukele Lungenge in his resignation last week, I quote, "The ANC has shown signs of decline, where the interests of the elite are protected and no longer speaks to the needs of the people." House Chair, on every measure, it is clear to see that only the DA is truly serving the people of South Africa by creating jobs, improving living standards, and broadening opportunity. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable McPherson. Honourable Dr. Tembagwayo.
Thank you, House Chair. In South Africa today, we are facing an economic crisis. Our people do not have access to land or the means of production, but at the same time, there are no jobs. What this essentially means is that for millions of South Africans, there is no way to survive besides dependence on the government social grant. For the last 25 years, the ANC government has done nothing to achieve the economic liberation of black South Africans from centuries of white oppression and exploitation. The latest quarterly labor force survey shows that South Africa's expanded unemployment rate is 37%, with over 9.7 million South Africans who are unemployed. Amongst women and youth, the unemployment rates are even higher, with more women being unemployed than employed, at 41.2% unemployed and 37.6% employed. When it comes to the youth, 67.7%, the young people between the ages of 15 and 24 who are part of the labor force are unemployed, and between the ages of 25 and 34, 42.8% are unemployed. The reasons why we have such high levels of unemployment is because for a quarter of a century, the ANC government has fully embraced neoliberal economics. This has resulted in deregulation, the opening up of South African markets, the growth of the financial sector, and the collapse of South Africa's industrial capacity. Since 1994, the manufacturing sector in South Africa has continued to decline, while the non-productive sectors of the economy, such as the financial sector, the service sector, and consumption, continues to expand. It is why we have economic growth without job creation, and why we continue to remain subject to neo-colonial trade relations. For a quarter of a century, the ANC has maintained the status quo and has mismanaged the economy. The ruling party has failed to build new cities, develop industries, and use special economic zones effectively. Instead, its members have focused on self-enrichment and greed. It is because of this South Africa remains an exporter of raw and semi-processed materials and an importer and consumer of finished products. South Africa's top export to China is mineral resources, and our top import from China is machinery. Our top export to United States is precious minerals, and our top import is machinery. The very minerals which the people of South Africa extract and sell are being sold back to them as finished products 10 times their original cost. If we continue along this path, our country will stay in a perpetual state of underdevelopment, and our people will continue to live in misery. For government to begin the process of transforming the economy, it must start by taking control of the means of production and developing the forces of production. The EFF manifesto is a concrete, implementable program of action as to how this can be achieved and how new jobs can be created. Following the nationalization of lands, mine, and other strategic sector of the economy.
Your time has now expired.
Thank you.
Mhlonishwa Hlengo.
Honorable House Chairperson, in 1994, South Africans stepped into a new dispensation filled with hopes, dreams, and aspirations for economic justice. We all hope for better days to come where we will all rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, leaving behind the nights of terror and fear. But what we thought was the light at the end of the tunnel, with each year that passed, we realized it was an oncoming train as the ANC continued to fail. Chair, the true measure of economic development of a country is the standard of living of the majority of its people. Tomorrow, the budget speech will come at a time of heightened anxiety about South Africa's economy. The numbers simply do not look good. Low economic growth projections, high unemployment, particularly amongst the youth, escalating inequality, a steady climb of debt to GDP, with National Treasury worryingly forecasting this could reach 60% by 2023-2024, surely to trigger IMF and World Bank interventions. The resultant consequence has been the regressive increase in debt servicing costs, which now stand at 180 billion rands annually. From President Ramaphosa's nation address, it was very clear that government, buoyed by election fever, was over-promising with high-level plans whilst anchored in low-level efficiency. The reality in this country is that the economy simply does not serve the majority of the people. And the upcoming budget tomorrow will be a moment of sobriety in comparison to the utopic honeymoon promises of SONA 2019 and, of course, what this debate called by the Honorable Mahlobo seeks to do. And this is precisely why we need to move away from the misguided rhetoric of the governing party and present a pragmatic economic agenda of plans and solutions. We need to move deliberately in the direction of growth, development, and sustainability. This government needs to put the people ahead of politics in order to serve all the people. The key to unlocking major economic setbacks lies with the powers that be, i.e. the failing ANC at this point in time. To get the economy to serve all South Africans, the forefront, the following are important. Education to produce the technical and innovative skills, knowledge and expertise required by the new inclusive economy and job markets we desire. Local economic development wherein new local economic niches are prioritized and beneficiated to maximize potential yield. This requires a new focus of building up local government capabilities on key areas of water, road, energy, and human settlement infrastructure planning. We must bite the bullet and decisively deal with ESCOM and all the other failing SOEs. So, Honorable Mahlobo, we are obliged by our conscience to point out that in order to achieve our collective goal to transform our economy, to build the South Africa where all South Africans enjoy dignity, opportunity, and prosperity, we need to be driven by the burning desire to eliminate historical inequalities and to do so in a bold, unapologetic, and responsible fashion. I thank you.
Thank you. Mhlonishwa Professor.
House Chairperson, thank you very much, honorable members. The National Freedom Party believes that this is a critical topic, particularly at this time when there are so many challenges that are facing the economy of the country, and this impacts negatively on the lives of our people. A debate of this nature, therefore, warrants that we move from rhetoric, sheer politicking, and political gimmickry. There are so many issues that are facing the people of South Africa. The country has been leaping from one challenge to another. Last year, we saw the increase of VAT and petrol. The country plunged into a technical recession. Many people were retrenched. Others still remain out of employment. A whopping 9.4 million people could not find any job. More than 37% of our youth lived in abject poverty and could not find employment. And it is the duty of the country to create an environment that is conducive to job creation and investment. The National Freedom Party therefore condemns labor brokerage and fronting. We need to correct our education system. We need education that will take our learners and students to the fourth industrial revolution. Hence, we cannot overemphasize the importance of skilling and upskilling our people right from early childhood development, and our children must be given some technologically based education up to university. House Chairperson, this country needs to invest in entrepreneurship development and small, medium enterprises. We need to unlock the mega infrastructure and township and rural economy. And that is where the administration of the ANC has been taking a knee-jerk approach or a snail's pace attitude. We need to create and produce industries. They must be in all sectors of the economy, e.g. manufacturing, mining, textile, agriculture, ocean economy, etc. We must create an economy that opens up some space for emerging enterprises. Our public transport system must be upgraded. We need to improve telecommunications and ensure that our country is well connected to Africa and the rest of the world. Let us deal with the cost of data. Our people must be taught to create their own jobs in order to save. Our country needs robust mechanisms of reducing the state debt. Hence, it is important to have well-run, well-managed, and well-governed SOEs by people with technical requisite skills. We know the saga with ESCOM and other SOEs. We need need a safe country, and we must deal with gender-based violence in our country, and this is the priority. All criminals must face the full might of the law. I thank you.
Mhlonishwa Filton.
An economy in any developing country has a duty to serve the needs of areas that have been underdeveloped. Pre-1994 South Africa, the majority of people in this country were left underdeveloped, underskilled, and excluded from the economy. 1994 raised hopes and dreams for a fair and equitable development path for all South Africans into the economy of this country. With the formation of the UDM in 1997, we realized that these hopes and dreams were never to materialize, and thus we provided an unbiased, non-racial, corrupt-free, and trustworthy alternative for South Africans to turn to. Here it is. South Africa can only be best served by an economy that is multi-pronged, since the country has two vastly different classes of citizens, the haves and the have-nots. Moreover, since we are a developing state, our education system needs to be restructured so that it prepares our youth to be research-oriented rather than just regurgitating old theories. Today's industrial world needs a labor force that is driven by creative minds. That should be the first level of transformation. All legislation dealing with our economy should state explicitly that one of the objectives is to transform it. Rules and regulations should specify the amount of local content that should be part of all goods manufactured in South Africa. There should be serious criminal consequences for failure to adhere thereto. Support for small businesses should be maximized. Recently, a young lady went to the East London offices of SEDA, an entity of the Department of Small Businesses. All she needed was non-financial support, like the drafting of a business plan. That officer's response was that they have no money. Money for what? When all they should have done was to draft a business plan for her. Then she proceeded to the Eastern Cape Development Corporation's business division, also in East London. Again, she came back empty-handed. Reason being that they could only support her financially if she wanted to procure tangible goods like bread and milk. This lady offers services in the sphere of health and safety in the construction industry. That is her chosen line of business, but the current government couldn't help. Another area that needs urgent attention is the extremely complex process of filling in application forms and piles of work when an entrepreneur wants to enter into medium-sized business space. You would rather go and attempt your second-year BCom than handle these finance forms. Cut down the ribbon, the red tape. A steady labor force ensures a healthy flow of goods from shops. This further creates higher demand for such goods from the manufacturing sector, thus increasing the demand for raw materials. What government needs then is to prudently and judiciously manage the tax revenue that comes with each sale transaction. That is all that is needed from the part of the government. Infrastructure and maintenance can create large volumes of permanent employment for the less educated. Large contracts should be broken down and spread amongst all suppliers. In that way, the economy will grow, not for a few, but so many. Thank you.
Thank you. Ek wil net verseker is agbare lid Alberts Neurni. Okay. Honorable Madisha.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. One wonders where and how the ANC cook up this Joseph Goebbels like cynical, dishonest, propagandist subjects for discussion. The truth is that it is the ANC that sabotaged and destroyed our economic prospects and continues to do so. Worse, it is the ANC that has abused the moral and legitimate need for economic transformation to enrich its own elite over and over again at the expense of the people, particularly the working class and the poor. This topic introduced by ANC is simply disingenuous, insincere, downright deceitful. The entire state capture project was premised on the supposed political desire to advance economic transformation. It turned out to represent our greatest betrayal. It has sabotaged and irrevocably damaged our transformational and developmental project. More and more South Africans are coming to the stark realization that the current ruling party has neither the capacity nor the will to create conditions for development, for transformation, and inclusive economic growth. Decisive leadership and brave choices must be made. But the governing party is so compromised, factionalized, and split, caught in its own web of sleaze, perversion, and corrupt interests, that it is paralyzed. The president says one thing, and the next day Luthuli House contradicts it. The president calls the reform and the ANC alliance partners howl blue murder. The ANC can't even keep the lights on. Apart from various significant structural reforms required to boost our economic prospects, we stand zero chance of attracting FDI, of encouraging development, inclusive growth, and large-scale job creation, or meeting the challenges and opportunities of fourth industrial revolution if government can't even keep the lights on. ANC betrayed the trust in it. It sabotaged our prospects for a transformed and prosperous society. South Africa needs a new center, a fresh start. COPE calls on all patriotic South Africans to work together to save South Africa. ANC Palage. Thank you.
Honorable Duckley.
Thank you, Chair. For the ACDP, transformation of the economy means greater inclusivity and not exclusivity, as we have seen in the past and sadly in the present. Those with skills and experience must be valued and encouraged to continue. Sorry.
Can you take your seat, Honorable Member? Honorable Filtani, on what point are you rising?
Just wanted to know if Reverend Mestre did pray over that speech before it's delivered.
Honorable Filtani, please don't come with your frivolous points of order. It's a waste of our time. Continue, Honorable Member.
Thank you. Of course, those with skills and experience must be valued and encouraged to continue to use their skills in the service of South Africa. It is these skills and this experience that must help to expand the economy, to draw more and more people into jobs, and to help skill more and more people. In this way, people will be able to move away from having to rely on government grants and to become self-reliant. We all want a South Africa with a vibrant, healthy economy where jobs and opportunities are in abundance, and a government that serves the people. The path to this begins with the skilling of people, ranging from a greater focus on diverse basic and tertiary education to driving adult education programs that are linked to industry needs. Yes, transforming the economy does begin with our children, even before schooling begins, and the ACDP will focus on making grade R available at all schools and make early childhood development accessible in all areas. These children must then progress through a world-class education system and not be casualties of experimental schooling. An example of this is the education that Zimbabweans accessed over many years. Their education happened to be the Cambridge system, which has given generations of Zimbabweans an enviable ability, not only to know facts, but to apply them together with a desire to work hard and support their families. Education must be career-focused, encouraging individual talents and giving youth the tools to be enthusiastic, skilled employees or innovative entrepreneurs. By revitalizing the apprenticeship model and expanding the employment tax incentive, the ACDP will encourage businesses to provide paid internships for school leavers. A confident youth who are contributing to society and earning a living are far more likely to be positive about a bright future and willing to build rather than destroy what they have. Women, of course, play an integral role in transforming the economy, and unions have an important role in monitoring fair labor practices and the health, safety, and well-being of workers. However, unions themselves must be accountable, as unfair influence in appointments and opting for crippling protests over negotiation undermine progress. The promotion of the much-needed local and foreign direct investment is hugely dependent on the protection of property rights. And the ACDP believes that local and international confidence will also increase as the safety of farmers and farm workers is taken seriously. In closing, the Bible teachings against dishonesty, stealing, and killing, and serving one another are sorely missing in our schools today, and the consequences are all too evident.
This ancient
Kweta xa besentabeni.
This ancient rite of passage
Umongameli uthi urhulumente usungule iqela
end.
Umongameli uthi urhulumente usungule
To an end.
Umongameli uthi urhulumente usungule iqela iqela eliza kuphonononga amagunya eenkosi zomthonyama. Bulelani Philip, SABC News eParlamente. Iqela eliza kuphonononga amagunya eenkosi zomthonyama. Bulelani Philip, SABC News eParlamente. Umongameli uthi urhulumente usungule iqela eliza ku Urhulumente usungule iqela eliza kuphonononga amagunya Bulelani Philip, SABC News eParlamente. President Ramaphosa is taking traditional leaders into his confidence. President Ramaphosa is taking traditional leaders into his confidence, and he moved to assure them that government wants a working relationship with traditional leaders. The president commended the contribution of traditional leaders in the land expropriation without compensation debate. This after some traditional leaders raised concerns around the future of land ownership under traditional councils.
Sorry, Joburg says you're coming through on a live line. So they can see editing and hear voices.
Can I ask Lucky because he knows where it's going to.
The president also narrated government's economic recovery plans. He says this plan will target agriculture, tourism, infrastructure and mining. President Ramaphosa has also called on traditional leaders to not see mining as a threat, but rather a benefit to their communities. President Ramaphosa also condemned the deaths of initiates around the country. He says legislation will soon be in place to help stop the deaths. The president has also assured traditional leaders that government is committed to review the powers and functions of traditional leaders. A task team has been set up to review these powers and functions. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament. How does a live line go from an edit suite? President Ramaphosa is taking traditional leaders into his and he moved to assure them that government to his confidence and he moved to assure them that government wants a working relationship with traditional leaders. The president commended the contribution of traditional leaders in the land expropriation without compensation debate. This after some traditional leaders raised concerns around the future of land ownership under traditional councils. The president also narrated government's economic recovery. The president also narrated government's economic recovery plans. He says this agriculture, tourism, infrastructure and mining. President Ramaphosa has also called on traditional leaders to not see mining as a threat, but rather a benefit to their communities. President Ramaphosa also condemned the deaths President Ramaphosa also condemned the deaths of initiates around the country. He says legislation will soon be in place to help stop the deaths. The president has also assured traditional leaders that government is committed to review the powers and functions of traditional leaders. A task team has been set up to review these powers and functions. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament. ownership under traditional councils.
We accept the an end.
The president has also assured President Ramaphosa President Ramaphosa is taking traditional leaders into his confidence, and he moved to assure them that government wants a working relationship with traditional leaders. The president commended the contribution of traditional leaders in the land expropriation without compensation debate. This after some traditional leaders raised concerns around the future of land ownership under traditional councils.
We accept the broad approach that land returned to communities in such areas should be held in custodianship by the traditional councils on behalf of the people.
The president also narrated government's economic recovery plans. He says this plan will target agriculture, tourism, infrastructure, and mining. President Ramaphosa has also called on traditional leaders to not see mining as a threat, but rather a benefit to their communities.
It
communities.
It introduces a new era in which mining should be seen as a great benefit, not as wealth, and takes it to foreign lands.
President Ramaphosa also condemned the deaths of initiates around the country. He says legislation will soon be in place to help stop the deaths.
This ancient rite of passage
Legislation will soon be in place to help place to help stop the deaths.
This ancient rite of passage should never be allowed to become synonymous with death and serious bring this to an end.
The president has also assured traditional leaders that government is committed to review the powers
and
the president has also assured traditional assured traditional leaders that government is committed to review the powers and functions of traditional leaders. A task team has been set up to review these powers and functions. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament. Umongameli Ramaphosa ukwiphulo lokusebenzisana ncakasana
we accept the broad approach that land returned to communities in such not as an industry that is going to damage, become synonymous, must bring this to an end.
Umongameli uthi uhulumende usungule traditional leaders raised concerns
and returned to communities in such areas should be seen as a great benefit. Should never be allowed to become synonymous
Umongameli Ramaphosa ukwiphulo lokusebenzisana ncakasana neenkosi zomthonyama uthi iinkokheli zemveli zinelungelo lokuthethathethana norhulumente waphinda wazibulela ngezimvo zazo ngalomthetho uyilwayo wokuthathwa kwemihlaba ngaphandle kwembuyekezo. Umongameli uthi imihlaba yenkosi iza kuhlala phantsi kolawulo lwazo.
We accept the broad approach that land returned to communities in such areas should be held in custodianship by the traditional councils on behalf of the people.
Umongameli uphinde wacacisa iinkqubo zikarhulumente zokuhlumisa ezoqoqosho ingakumbi kwezolimo, kwezokhenketho kwaye nakwizimbiwa. Udlulise wathi iinkosi zomthonyama mazizamkele iinzame zeenkampani zezimbiwa zokuphuhlisa emaphandleni.
It introduces a new era in which mining should be seen as a great benefit, not as an industry that is going to damage the lives of our people, damage the areas where mining takes place, and ekes out the wealth and takes it to foreign lands.
Umongameli Ramaphosa uphinde wazigqiba izehlo zokonzakala kwaye nokubhubha kwabakhwetha xa besentabeni.
This ancient rite of passage should never be allowed to become synonymous with death and serious injury to the young men of our country. We must bring this to an end.
Umongameli uthi uhulumende usungule iqela eliza kuphonononga amagunya eenkosi zomthonyama. Bulelani Philip, SABC News eParlamente. President Ramaphosa is taking traditional leaders into his confidence, and he moved to assure them that government wants a working relationship with traditional leaders. The president commended the contribution of traditional leaders in the land expropriation without compensation debate. This after some traditional leaders raised concerns around the future of land ownership under traditional councils.
We accept the broad approach that land returned to communities in such areas should be held in custodianship by the traditional councils on behalf of the people.
The president also narrated government's economic recovery plans. He says this plan will target agriculture, tourism, infrastructure, and mining. President Ramaphosa has also called on traditional leaders to not see mining as a threat, but rather a benefit to their communities.
It introduces a new era in which mining should be seen as a great benefit, not as an industry that is going to damage the lives of our people, damage the areas where mining takes place, and ekes out the wealth and takes it to foreign lands.
President Ramaphosa also condemned the deaths of initiates around the country. He says legislation will soon be in place to help stop the deaths.
This ancient rite of passage should never be allowed to become synonymous with death and serious injury to the young men of our country. We must bring this to an end.
The president has also assured traditional leaders that government is committed to review the powers and functions of traditional leaders. A task team has been set up to review these powers and functions. Ulelani Philip, SABC News, Parliament. Nkosi zomthonyama uthi inkokheli zemveli zinelungelo lokuthetha-thetha. Is taking traditional leaders into his confidence, and he moved to assure them that uMongameli Ramaphosa
to foreign lands.
soon be in place to help stop the deaths.
This
soon be in place to help stop the deaths. Legislation will soon be in place to help stop the deaths.
This
stop the deaths.
This ancient
Stop the deaths.
This ancient right to an end.
The president has also assured